Death at Devil's Bridge. Chapter 12. Then you have discovered the means of guiding a balloon? Not at all. That is a utopian idea. Then you will go whithersoever Providence wills. 5 weeks in a balloon. Jules Verne, 1869. To Charles, the balloon felt like a live thing. The gondola surged under him, and his stomach lurched as it did when his horse cleared a high stone fence. They were rising, no, shooting up, in an ascent that was somewhat beyond anyone's control. In 2 beats of the heart, and Charles' heart was beating fast with excitement, they were 20 feet above the milling crowd. The mooring lines writhed like snakes just out of reach of the grasping hands of the marchers, who were furious to have been cheated out of their victory. The vicar pulled off his bright-coloured scarf and began to wave it. "Goodbye!" he called in his high, thin voice, almost lost in the rough hubbub of the shouts and jeers. "Good luck!" Bradford shouted. "Telegraph as soon as you've set down." But through the din, it was Kate's sweeter voice that rang in Charles's ear, calling with love. "Goodbye, Charles. Goodbye, my dear." For the moment, there was almost no breeze. The balloon was still rising straight up as rapidly and effortlessly as if it was a bobbin on a string pulled upward by a giant somewhere above the clouds. Looking down, Charles saw that the melee, rather than being diminished by the balloon's departure, seemed to be growing. Bradford had picked something up from the ground, a tool of some sort, and was waving it frantically. Whatever it was, the object renewed the crowd's frenzy, and it surged around Bradford until he was all but swallowed up. "Can you make out that thing in Marston's hand?" Rolls asked, leaning over the rim of the gondola. "I trust it wasn't a piece of our equipment." Charles reached for his field glasses, trained them on the scene below, but the breeze was freshening, wafting them swiftly eastward, and the distance was already too great to make out. "I can't see, I'm afraid," Charles said. He shifted his glasses to the line of motor cars. "It looks as if the drivers will be able to get on the way while the marchers are still scuffling, though. There goes Albrecht in Marston's Daimler off in a cloud of dust," he frowned. "But he's alone." "Still no Dunstable?" Rose was dismayed. "Something must have happened to the man," said Charles. "I know it. He's convinced that Albrecht will win, of course, and he has been planning to ride with him ever since the chase was thought of. He would not have missed it if he had to drag himself on his 2 hands and knees." "At 200 feet in the air and rising," Charles said, "there is little we could do to help him." "We shall have enough to do to help ourselves," Rhodes said ruefully, picking up the tangle of lines. "But I'll take the joys and risk of the wild blue over a battle with pitchforks any day, won't you? I say, though, I could certainly wish for a more deliberate departure. That lot rather hurried us off." But Charles, looking wonderingly about him, did not reply. Since his school days as a Woolwich military cadet, he had been enthralled by maps, fascinated by their wonderful detail, captivated by their precise location of streams and bridges and roads and villages. Now the landscape was spread out below him, just as he had so often spread a map out on a table for study, but in even more exquisite detail than any map could ever represent it. To the north and west, Bishop Keep woodlands. He could see the village of Dedham, the square grey tower of St. Mary the Virgin rising commandingly in its centre. To one side of the church was the bright green of the churchyard cemetery, to the other the red tiled roofs of High Street. Mill Lane led to the iron bridge across the silver ribbon of the River Stour, downstream from the locks that raised and lowers the barges out of the mill pond. Beyond the bridge, the river wound its way down to Flatford, through velvety meadows speckled with black and white cattle. A few miles to the east and north, the Stour emptied into the silvery flats of Seafield Bay, where Charles could make out the harbour towns of Manningtree and Lawford, and even Mistley farther to the east. Farther eastward still, the horizon receded into the flat grey blue of the North Sea. The sense of distance and range he had honed during his brief career as an officer in the Royal Engineers told him that they were 2,000 feet above the ground, almost as high as Rolls aimed to go, apparently, for he began to pull on the red-painted ripcord that opened a valve in the top of the balloon, reducing their rate of ascent. They were moving rapidly now, too, as the winds caught the gaily striped balloon and began to sweep it quickly eastward, the gondola swinging beneath like a giant wicker pendulum. With no means of steering, the balloon would go with the wind, and they would too, willy-nilly. Charles recalled himself from the scenic vista. Their departure had been something less than orderly, and he had not been able to go through his pre-launch checklist. His first thought was for his photographic gear. After all, he had joined this expedition in order to take pictures. Moving carefully, for there was no room to spare in the small gondola, he found the canvas bags he had instructed Lawrence to stow, containing 2 hand cameras, one fitted with a long focus lens, a box of dark slides, and an exposure meter and its supply of sensitive paper. With the bags was a small packet, and Charles smiled when he opened a corner of it to see sandwiches, biscuits, and an apple. Kate had seen to his lunch. He took out the camera with the long focus lens, loaded a changing box, and began to shoot. Having taken a half-dozen photos, he was putting the camera away when his eye fell on a tiny crockery pot, its lid held tight with a wire bail half hidden under a canvas bag. Curious, he opened the pot to find a red-colored grease. He worked a small quantity between his thumb and forefinger, then sniffed it and wrinkled his nose. Lard or suet or some such organic lubricant stirred into a mass of stewed vegetation colored with something red. Blood? Whatever the stuff was, it had a sharp, peculiar odor, quite distant. He held the jar up to Rolls. "Some sort of lubricant for your equipment." "Never saw it before," Rolls said with a shake of his head. He wore a strained look. "I say, Sir Charles, have you seen the grapnel?" Charles dropped the jar into his camera bag and leaned over the edge of the gondola to look. "Anchor. It's hanging right there on the outside of—" But it wasn't. The 5-pronged iron grapnel on which they had depended to arrest the balloon at the end of the flight was gone. Rolls hit his forehead with the heel of his hand. "Bloody hell!" he cried. "Could that have been the confounded thing that Bradford was waving in the air as we ascended?" "It might have been," Charles said grimly. If that were the case, then the company on the ground, including Kate, knew of their difficulty. He was sorry for that, because there was nothing anyone down there could do to help them. All Kate could do was worry and pray. He forced a smile. "I hope at some time or other you've managed to descend without a grapnel." "To tell the truth, Sir Charles," Rolls said lamely, "I have never managed a descent at all. Strictly speaking, that is. In point of truth, I mean, sir." "What?" Charles exclaimed, dumbstruck. You said—" "Awfully sorry," Rolls said sheepishly. "I have a vile habit of pretending to have more experience than I actually have. Sometimes it's the only way a chap can get on." His boyish grin was embarrassed. "The balloon was loaned to me, you see, and Dunstable was terribly anxious for publicity and the photographs and all. Marston said you're a cautious man and wouldn't fly with me if you knew that my 2 previous flights were made as a passenger, not, I must confess, as a pilot in command. But I can bring us down," he added hastily. "Never fear, it's simply a matter of—" "Only 2 flights!" Charles cried, indignant. "So you know nothing about ballooning." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Rolls tried to be reassuring. "I know the important things. I know them, although I may not have done them yet. But don't worry, we'll get down all right. Although," he added regretfully, "the descent would be a damned sight more agreeable with the grapnel. I wonder, do you have a suggestion?" Charles set his jaw. An experienced aeronaut might have gotten them out of this fix, but it wasn't likely that a boy could do it. A brash little popinjay, as Henry Royce had said, with only 2 flights under his belt. "We ought to bring the balloon down somewhat," he said, thinking out loud, "and maintain altitude until we get within sight of one of our ground crews. Then we shall have to come down fast. Since we can't anchor, we'll need all the help we can get once we're on the ground." "Righto," Rolls said. He reached for the ripcord and vented some gas. The balloon dropped swiftly to an altitude that Charles judged to be about 2,000 feet. For what seemed an eternity they rode in silence, scanning the ground beneath them. Charles spotted the gravel track of the Colchester Harwich Road and the village of Vix, scarcely more than a collection of cottages and a pub. And then the green and gold of meadows and fields gave way to the grey of the Essex marshes, ruled into section by long, straight lines of drains. Turning, he brought up his glasses and scanned the road and lanes behind them, but there was not a sign of a motor car anywhere. For the cars as well as the balloon, the chase was doomed. Rolls broke the silence. "If I'm not mistaken, that is the village of Great Oakley ahead." "That is at least good news," Charles said. "Lawrence Quibley was dispatched to Great Oakley. He's a reliable and innovative chap. I should be especially glad of his help." He brought up his field glasses. "At this heading, we'll pass directly over the village. If Quibley is watching, he'll see us. But past Great Oakley, we shall have to descend at once, Rolls. There is only tideland, bog, and fen ahead, and large stretches of open water. Not the sort of place we should like to put down." Reaching for the ripcord again, Rolls hesitated. "Bog and fen? Should we go further then? What is beyond?" Beyond? Charles laughed briefly. A short way beyond lies the North Sea. Vent the gas and bring us down, Roald, so you shall find yourself making that crossing you're so keen on. He began to wrap the end of a long mooring line around the middle of a sandbag, tying it firmly. He was working on the second sandbag when he looked up to find Roald with his hand on the ripcord, staring upward. Come on, man, vent the gas and bring us down, Charles shouted. We don't have much time. I can't, Roald replied, and yanked frantically on the cord. The damn thing is jammed. Charles was a calm man, but this news shook him. From everything he had read, including reports of disasters, the landing was the most challenging part of the flight. It would have been difficult enough to land the balloon without the grapnel, but with no means of letting the gas out and bringing the balloon down, it was entirely impossible.